Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 11 of our webinar series on museum management training. So we have a very interesting topic for today on research and publications on museums. No? So I hope everybody is fine despite the wrath of Typhoon Ulysses. So we're trying to keep our spirits up by continuing with our series of webinars. It was interrupted last week because of the typhoon. So we will continue. So for today, we will have Dr. Juan Carlos Gonzalez, Director and Curator of the Museum of Natural History in UP Los Baños. And then I will be giving a talk tomorrow on curation and conceptualizing exhibitions. So today I would like to introduce Professor Juan Carlos Gonzalez, who is currently a professor of um, zoology at the Animal Biology Division of the Institute of Biological Sciences in UP Los Baños. He completed both his Bachelor's of Science degree in zoology and Master of Science degree in zoology at UP Los Baños, and earned his PhD in zoology at the University of Oxford through the support of the Ford Foundation International Fellowship Program. Across his 27 years at UPLB, recognition was given for his scholarly outputs and innovative efforts in instruction, research, and extension, especially in the field of zoology, wildlife biology, and systematics. He was a recipient of the UPLB CASAA 2002 Outstanding Alumni for Extension, UPLB 2008 Outstanding Teacher Award for Biological Sciences, and the Outstanding UPLB Alumnus Award for Wildlife Research and Conservation in 2019. Dr. Gonzalez has been a recipient of several UP International Paper Awards, professorial chairs, one UP faculty grants, and conferred as UP Scientist 2 in 2014. He was bestowed the 2011 Outstanding Young Scientist Award for Zoology by the National Academy of Science and Technology in the Philippines. In 2015, he was appointed as director of the UPLB Museum of Natural History, an integrative multi-awarded research and service unit of UP Los Baños, mandated to document and promote the Philippines' rich biological diversity. So with almost 3 decades of experience in research and in work in biodiversity, we welcome Professor Juan Carlos Gonzalez, who's also a good friend of mine. Hello, JC. How are you? Good morning. So we will start the presentation today, live from UP Las Bañas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amores, King. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to thank Museo Kordilyera, University of the Philippines, Baguio, and CHED for this important training indeed for museum management, particularly for university museums. So for today, I will be sharing with you part of Cluster 5 on exhibition collaterals, which centers on research for university museums. Actually includes also a bit on publication. Of course, research and publication goes hand in hand because as you complete your research, you need to publish it. So for today, I'll be sharing my slide. Okay, so again, good morning, everyone. So research is an important part of my department, which is the Institute of Biological Sciences at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Actually, as a teacher, we often have too many hats. We do both teaching, research, and extension. But as being appointed as director of the Museum of Natural History in UPLB, of course, it is a part of the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Extension. So it does a lot more of research and extension duties. So being part of the Museum of Natural History in Los Banos, which has been there for 44 years, 1976. We were established. It's one of the important university museums in the country. It probably has one of the largest collections. So I'd like to share with you the research experience that we had with the museum. Of course, the research perspective is as a museum, because there's a diverse group of different museums, that perspective will be behind the Natural History Museum. Of course, nowadays, the Natural History Museum has evolved. It is no longer a dusty cabinet of oddities. It has added in a lot of different components, being more global as well as regional in coverage. It's more ecosystems based in focus rather than particular taxa alone. Of course, now they have interactive displays, no longer the do not touch signs. They added live exhibits. Of course, they breed some of the live exhibits that they have. And they often intermix culture and art within the Natural History Museum. Also, they use a lot of important techniques nowadays adopted from molecular biologists as barcoding. And now we look into the science of expedition. We don't just look into a series of notes explaining where we've been, but it's more of an agenda of how certain sciences are involved in achieving that. And of course, it also involves conservation education. Now, because biodiversity, being a hotspot for biodiversity, the Philippines, of course, must entail a conservation theme. Research, in a sense, is innovation. For the museum, we can expand our collections, we can improve our knowledge. Of course, the research can be used for the exhibition. It can be a form of collaboration. It can help develop the museum. It can also increase your manpower by adding projects. Of course, you can hire people. And also, it's a means to safeguard your collections. So again, I am from the Museum of Natural History. I have been director since 2015. Next year will be my last year of my second term. It's been fun. It is still fun. And it's an amazing assemblage of people, including both the staff and the curators. So it is quite unique. The UPLB Museum of Natural History is a university museum, and being created by the Board of Regents in established by the Board of Regents in 1976. It is, of course, a unique institution within the UP system. Of course, UP being the national university. So in a sense, we're sort of the National University Museum of Natural History. We are found in 4 locations within the campus, but of course, the main building is at the CFNR Quad, which as you see there in the photo. And we have 8 sections, including 7 collections. We have 19 regular staff. Of course, we also have project staff. And we have more than 600,000 specimens for the entire set of collections. Of course, the staff is shown here in the photo. So the different sections are the Botanical Herbarium, also known as the, from the old name, College of Agriculture Herbarium, University of the Philippines, or CAHU. We also have the Mycological Herbarium, which includes fungi and mushrooms. We have the Forestry Herbarium and Xylarium, or wood collection, also known as the Las Banas collection. We also have a set of live plants at the UPLB Hortorium. We have one of the largest insect collections and arthropod collections at the Entomological Collection. We have one of the first microbial culture collections, which also includes a bit of algal culture collections. We have the Zoological and Wildlife Collection, which of course includes the important DS Rabor Wildlife Collection. Added to that section is a set of special collections. You have several minerals, rocks, and fossils, which are integrated in the exhibits. We consider the Museum of Natural History as a center for biodiversity research and conservation. Sort of my byword is that we cover a lot of spectrum of biodiversity, from microbes to mammals. And we consider that taxonomy is an important part of that research and conservation. We need to understand, for us to conserve biodiversity, we need to understand what species are there, how many species are there, how can you differentiate the different species. So it is important for taxonomy to be there. It's sort of the bread and butter for Museum of Natural History. Within the MNH, we have several research foci or focus. We specialize in insect and arachnid systematics. We have good research in mycology and medical botany. We also have both microsnail and land snail taxonomists. There's importance of bat and bat guano microbiology, as well, of course, the different taxonomic groups, including the important wildlife natural history, birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. As you see, they're exemplified by microbes to mammals, bacteria to the Philippine Colugo Cynocephalus volans. MNH is also important for supporting research, not just within the museum, but also outside the museums, because we have museum services. We help identify species, such as unknowns, which are done on research by other projects. We also verify if the scientific name or the taxonomy being used in a particular thesis or dissertation is correct. We also have culture collection. Of course, we can provide the different cultures as well as microbial analysis. We have collaborative multidisciplinary research, both for more widespread biodiversity assessment. We also help in conservation status assessment. And we also establish training on museum techniques in biodiversity studies. Usually that's our summer course, but because of COVID-19, we had to postpone it for this year, for next year. We also have, because it is one of the largest collections of specimens in the Philippines, so if you need to access certain materials or specimens, we do allow collections access, and of course, mentoring. There are several projects ongoing and of course completed by the museum recently. Some of them got grouped together in sort of a set of programs. One is island biodiversity. We have done a lot of work in Polillo. Recently, we went to Siargao and Dinagat. We also have a lot of projects concerned with mountain ecosystem, including collaboration with Central Mindanao University, as well as work on Calvario Patapat National Park. We'd recently submitted a proposal for studying caves and karst landscapes. Although the museum has been working on cave biodiversity for many years. Of course, our nearest laboratory, Mount Makiling, we do a lot of projects there, including one which is concerned with the forest canopy. Some of our researchers work on microbiomes as well as zoonosis, including bat viruses, which of course are very important nowadays due to the pandemic. And each of those different curators have specific taxonomic groups that they want to focus, and in turn, help curate. And of course, you have to develop the collections and manage them properly. So that also entails research. Research also involves a lot of outcomes. Of course, looking through the different specimens that you collect, you determine which of them might be new to science or things that you need to revise taxonomically, especially in this age where a lot of techniques are being used in systematics, that it's very dynamic. So even for us, I work in birds because I'm an ornithologist. The checklist for the Philippines is always growing every year, because not only with the added list of species being recorded, but also changes in the taxonomy. So a lot of studies, of course, help us understand more about linkages within the environment, especially between species. And of course, some of them entail ecosystem services, and that helps develop natural history science. We also understand a bit of impacts on climate or impacts of calamities such as typhoons, impact of urbanization, invasive alien species and pests, and our importance on how we contribute to ecotourism and public awareness, as well as the development of educational materials. We also contribute to conservation assessment. Our curators and staff have been involved with the Red List, both with aquatic and terrestrial, as well as policy support for the different programs of the government, including on cave management. And what's interesting about our country, also because of the multidisciplinary system, we kind of allow ourselves to apply different methods, and some of them apply to biotechnology, especially in the field of microbiology. So at this stage, I'd like to enumerate some 10 significant points we consider important about the use of museum research. So one is natural history studies, particularly the ones that you do on field, so on site. It's important because you discover a lot of new taxa. It's important because you help assess the assemblage of biodiversity within an area. And you also contribute to ecological studies. Some of the species that we've been able to, well, collectively, curators and staff of the MNH have discovered about 80 species since 2015, including these, one of which is the Strongylodon Juan Gonzalez. I know it's named after me. So it's interesting because it's one of the recent species of Strongylodon or jade vines have been described recently, as well as the species of laughing cicada on the right, and a species of ant that was named after the late President Cory Aquino. So within the museum, we have sort of grouped together those different projects into sort of a research program, and most of which are kind of grouped together based on their ecosystem. So the ecosystem based. So one, of course, is caves, concentrate also on small islands, the forest canopy, wetlands, and mountains. So here are the recent studies we've done. So cave survey of several caves in Santa Teresita, Cagayan, as well as several caves around Mabini in Pangasinan. We also did studies on wetland birds in Cagayan, particularly in Santa Teresita and Bugay. We've worked with some of the small lands and involved as a volunteer to Bataha Reef, where we help count birds. Project has been continuing to do studies on bats in Polillo. We've done a assessment of biodiversity in Balisin. More recently, we've been part of the Carrying Capacity Project in El Nido, as well as the fauna and flora survey of the mangroves of Del Carmen and Siargao. One of the important forest areas that we've done, of course, in Mount Makiling is helping understand the biodiversity above the tree layer, of course, in the forest canopy. Often we do studies at ground level because it's easier, it's more accessible. Now we have to increase our accessibility and see the stratification above what is above ground level. Also did, of course, biodiversity surveys in Calvario Patapat National Park, in Mulanay, in Mount Calabite, and in Polillo. So collectively, it's sort of a comprehensive study because it covers not just a specific group of organisms, not just wildlife, it also includes arthropods, flora, mushrooms, fungi, and of course, microbes. Second, natural history studies done in the lab or in ex situ research often bring the specimens alive back to the museum for further behavioral studies for animals, of course, growth studies for plants, and of course, cultures for microbes. So there's a husbandry of analogs, which are important sometimes because they may be related to a threatened species, so they can be used as an analog for conservation breeding. We also help exhibit some of the specimens that we collect. It's interesting to have a live exhibit within the museum, especially for understanding behavior. We also have document life cycles. And of course, with microbes, we have lab cultures, and we have a conservatory for the plants, which is represented by the hortorium. So here is the Lab-based studies here is Dr. Marian De Leon, a researcher for microbiology, is also the curator for the microbial culture collection, studying bat guano microbiomes. And below you have Project Palaka, which is husbandry of frogs in the Philippines. We're working together with Norman Greenhawk of Washington College. Here you have a photo of a boy feeding mango leaves to a set of stick insects we've been culturing for the past 8 years. So again, as we breed some of this the species that we bring from field, we integrate some of those live exhibits into the exhibit. One is the epicenter, which we feature ferns and orchids and Hoyas, some epiphytic vines. At the UPLB Hortorium, it's sort of an equivalent to a botanical garden, but it has specific areas such as a bambustetum, a palmetum. So actually, it's one of the old arboretums in the campus. Within the exhibit, we have a set of herpetaria, insectary, and aquariums featuring some of the native species from the Philippines. If you haven't seen a live ayungin, so we have ayungin in the aquaria. And of course, we have in the garden medicinal plants. Third, collections research and management. So one of the things that we do with the collection that we have is help develop it and bring it to a more accessible system. So one is a database system. So we're now digitizing the data, particularly some of the specimens, which are more important. Also because of some of our specimens are part of the heritage collection. We have to safeguard them from use or excessive handling. So one is now we're scanning and taking high-res photos of the specimens for easier access, and also as a photographic record. We're also finding novel solutions to help improve preservation and storage within some of the specimens in our collection. Of course, there is greater value in our historical collections because they are historical baselines. They are permanent records. They also value on species which have been lost or no longer found in the wild, and also as vouchers for new species. It's a basis for comparative studies. It's also a genetic resource. In some specimens, you can still take historical DNA. It also sort of embeds a global access if you digitize the data and make it more accessible online. Of course, nowadays it's harder to collect some of the specimens. There are restrictions in the collection, but also you need a permit to collect a specimen. So you need to apply for a gratuitous permit from DNR. If you're handling an animal, you need also to get an IACUC permit from the DA. A lot of the species now, we have to decide properly whether you collect it or not, because some of the species might be threatened or in reduced population. Also, the collections, of course, are important. They're still threatened by fire and theft. If you remember, there were 2 fires in Brazil on the museum. So we have to step up our fire protection in our collections. Especially if you have a room full of jars of animals kept in ethyl alcohol. It's a fire hazard. So one is part of that digitization project is looking at how to improve the access of the museum collection remotely. So of course, not just within the Philippines, but for global access. And nowadays it's more important because the collections are limited to access. There's a lot of biosafety guidelines for you to be able to get to UPLB and then of course, go to the collections. Yes, there's a lot of paperwork. Well, not everyone, of course, has access around the world because of the pandemic. So we were fortunate to have a approved digitization project called Digitization and Mobilization Regional Heritage Biological Specimens, focusing first on our collections taken from Luzon. We were able to secure a grant from BIFA. Of course, this will help upload and gain access our database to the global database of GBIF. If you haven't seen GBIF, here's an example of how you can access that. So here are some of the, if you do a search, for example, I've searched some of the species birds listed. And of course, it shows you some of the uploaded data from the different collections which have uploaded their data in GBIF from Harvard. Fourth, you have improvement in museum services and exhibits. We need to help improve the perception of our visitors as well as researchers on the use of the exhibits. We've now, of course, included a wider grip on social media. So you need to also take in social media surveys and online evaluation. You also need to evaluate the services that we provide. So here we have a set of biodiversity services, from short courses to biological inventory, loading specimens, requesting cultures, internship. So all of these should have an evaluation process. So again, at the end of this webinar, there will be an evaluation. Also, you can have evaluations of your exhibits per se, wherein you have a way for your guests or visitors to be able to go online and then, of course, put in their comments. It's not just about the collections. Of course, social media influence is important. It helps an impact on awareness, help evaluate training and seminars, evaluation of services, improvement monitoring that service, innovation of the exhibitions, innovation of the collections management, of course, helping monitor standards, help upgrade the standards, also help capacitate your staff, and of course, it's important for the usual performance evaluation and achievement of targets. So we are now maintaining because of COVID-19, we are maintaining some of our services on an online platform. We have improved the museum webpage. We are on nearly all key social media platforms, from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TripAdvisor, Google Community, and of course, we have our own YouTube channel. So yes, please do visit our YouTube channel. We have also launched our open access online scientific journal of the museum called Daksang Buhay. And for those who can't, because the museum is close to visitors, but our services are open and our office are open. But of course, visiting to see the exhibits is of course restricted at this time. We do have a virtual tour of part of the exhibits, both on YouTube and on Virtue. So here are some of our online platforms. Here is our YouTube channel. You like us on Facebook. Okay, 5, collaborative and applied research. So we do have, even though we have a lot of specialists in terms of the different taxonomic groups in the form of our staff and our curators, we do need to collaborate with other institutions in terms of other aspects of it, particularly if it's a multidisciplinary research. Also because it helps improve relations as well as improve the techniques being used through research. So one of those applied research that have been completed are work on bat viruses, also on insect pests, including Cocolisa, which was headed by our previous director, Dr. De Leon. Of course, Dr. De Leon has been active in understanding the different cave microbes taken from bat guano. And of course, it helps develop or help assess certain data important for policy delivery. One of which is finding data to help develop a proposal for a Ramsar evaluation for Siargao mangroves. One is the understanding of biodiversity and management of key mountains in Mindanao, together with Central Mindanao University. And of course, carrying capacity with SESAM and BMD. So here are some of the publications that were developed from some of those studies that we did. For, of course, Professor Obiola and Dr. Masangkay were involved, as well as some of the museum staff on the study of bat coronaviruses in the Philippines. And of course, the bacterial diversity of bat guano from the caves in Pangasinan, headed by Dr. De Leon. So we apply interdisciplinary methods within museum studies. It's not just basically a particular group of methods that you use in your taxonomic group. Nowadays, of course, you use a lot of other methods, borrowing from molecular biology, borrowing from engineering. Of course, GIS is also important. So here we have a set of techniques that we use, especially with the study of microbes and in taxonomy, molecular phylogenetics and barcoding. And for microbes, we have genomic and metagenomic studies. And more recently, we finished the forest canopy studies, where we had to have skills for tree climbing, the use of harnesses to help access the forest canopy. So here are some of those molecular techniques that we use, also with high-res imaging. Part of the global barcoding initiative, we do allows destructive sampling, which when you take historical DNA from certain parts of a specimen, such as for birds, we use the topads. We have microbial analysis, which involves the use of molecular techniques. Digital images now are being used as vouchers, so to improve natural history photography. And of course, all of these would be useful in modern systematics. So here are some of the results that we have in terms of our research. I was able to derive historical DNA from museum skins, both specimens or skins deposited in the Philippines and of course in UK and US. And you have the study of microbes from bat guano again from Dr. De Leon. So we consider some of those key researches, particularly the forest canopy, to be multidisciplinary. It's actually, our project was part of the bigger program called Forest Canopy, which is of course funded through EIDR, UP-EIDR and DOST, wherein it's not just flora and fauna, but also includes microbes in terms of study of the forest structure. We've recently finished a proposal for cave ecosystems, looking on not just the flora and fauna, but also the microbiome of the different of organisms found in bat guano and bat gut. Our biodiversity study with CMU also involves a social aspect on the study of Mindanao mountains, and as does the Siargao Mangrove Biodiversity Project, which encompassed 6-7 different institutions, collectively to look into a lot of taxonomic groups. So here is the result of our forest canopy. One of our publications recently was on the distribution of understanding canopy vertebrate fauna in Mount Makini, particularly in that particular area where we had the site. 7, collections as a basis for student research. Of course, being a university museum, we have to cater not just to visitors, but of course, our own students and our faculty. So we help mentor students in terms of their studies, particularly those which are allied to systematics, certain key taxa that we have, especially when we have the particular specialists in terms of curators or staff. Examples, we have the experts on snails, ants, mites. So some of the students actually help work on those particular fields. We also help support the field studies. We bring them along in terms of expeditions and projects, such as also work on cave bats, herpetofauna in Buyan, and work on ectoparasites in Magpatiling. We also allow the students to work directly on the collections if it involves use of the collections, especially for historical DNA or morphometric studies. Here's recently one of my students working on feather lice that are found on study skins that have been collected 30 years ago. So they still have feather lice on them. Of course, the aim of that research, of course, be publication. So here are some of the papers that resulting from that. So one of our thesis students that worked in the museum, Camila Meneses, finished her work on herpetofauna Sibuyan. She's now a staff of the museum. Joseph Rasalan was able to publish describe a new species of spider together with our curator for spiders, Dr. Barendupo. Next, we have museum services in support of university research. So just goes back to an enumeration of our museum services, one of which is specimen identification. So we do have a series of fees where, of course, each of the fees varies depending on the taxonomic group and how difficult they are to identify. The more difficult they are, of course, the higher the fee. And also it involves some sort of specialized preparation of the specimen. We, of course, deplore that specimens to be identified must be properly preserved. It can't be just a frog placed into a bottle and put in with alcohol. It has to be fixed properly to be able to see the key characters. We also have services on microbial analysis and culture sources. So all of these are available on our website. Here, and also the procedures involved. If you do have important questions to be addressed, your queries on email to services.mnh.uplb@up.edu.ph. Again, go to the website and you'll see all the different contacts for a particular set of services that you may need. 9, museum in support of academic programs. Again, being a university museum, most of the collections were actually developed in 1976 from all the teaching collections that were compiled by the different professors. And of course, when the time they created the museum, these were from different colleges, most of which are involved in the natural sciences. So we use these specimens to help, of course, help teach some of the taxon-specific courses, as well as an important venue for understanding natural sciences and underground biology. Some of the key courses we have a direct involvement with, such as cave ecology, and because UPLB has one of the unique courses on museum herbarium curatorship. So again, the collections are a tool for teaching biological sciences in support of natural sciences, such as museum herbarium studies, cave ecology, taxonomy and systematics, of course, detailed studies relating to botany, entomology, zoology, mycology, microbiology, and forestry, as well as veterinary medicine. So we also help support training courses and have museum internship, although at the moment, of course, because of COVID-19, we have to postpone some of those programs. We do have support for student research in terms of mentorship, but again, all of this have been done remotely. The museum itself is an important venue for discovery, understanding our own natural history in the Philippines. Our exhibits are focused on Philippine biodiversity. We do have museum internship, biodiversity seminar series. If you want to view some of the older seminars, we have them on our YouTube channel. The training on identification and museum techniques, so a summer course, and have novel studies in both medicinal plants, cave microbes, and bat viruses. And lastly, so you have research and museum publications. So of course, all the research after that needs to be published. You need to put out your research to the world for global access. Some of which that I think are important for the museum is a catalog of collections to be able to, for researchers to determine what specimens are available at the museum and their condition. So here are two examples of the catalogs. Three examples, catalog of microbial cultures and two sets of catalogs on mites. We also have papers that are specific to taxonomic groups, such as revisions of a particular taxonomy of species, of course, describing new taxa as well. We do checklists and inventories for the different areas that we've been to. And if there's important behavioral or biological notes, we do a natural history research paper. That's why we had to put up our own online journal, Laksambuhay, which actually was the old UPLB Journal of Natural History, developed further. There are other accessible journals. National Museum of the Philippines has its own journal. The original Bureau of Science publication, the Philippine Journal of Science, is still continuing under the OST. And there are other local journals which are important, and in our case, focused on systematics, such as the Philippine Journal of Systematic Biology. We also have other museum publications. We have field guides, developed manuals and handbooks, specifically after we've done certain expeditions on an area. So we develop a guide for that. There are other publications that are important, such as museum expedition notes and historical accounts. You can also have a set, especially now with COVID-19. In print is a bit difficult, so you can have online publications, as develop your own newsletter. You can do updates, news on a web page or a particular blog. Of course, nowadays with publications, if you are going to do a scientific paper, if you are using specimens, it's best to acknowledge the specimens examined and where they're from, their accession numbers, also to acknowledge your collection permits. Some journals actually require you to add in the collection permit number, particularly for your gratuitous permit and your IACO permits. And of course, you have certain database papers. If you do have uploaded your data to GBIF, you can then use that to do meta-analysis through a database paper. So hopefully I've been able to join you to look into further research. I know your museum might have a more specific venue for access and doing research and publication. But here is our experience in terms of natural history museums. And with that, I would like to say thank you, salamat po. And of course, my word for this pandemic is stay safe.
Okay, thank you very much, JC, to that most engaging talk. No? So you covered a lot of topics regarding research and publications for a specific case like the Museum of Natural History. So we have a lot of questions coming in. So would like to start with this first question. For HEIs on the first stages of establishing their own museum, should they focus more on research and creating a niche field of research? For instance, UP Baguio Museo Kordilyera is more on Cordillera studies before collecting artifacts, or can it be the other way around?
So it's specific for a particular set of artifacts. So there are a set of permits in terms of collections. Of course, for biological specimens, we apply for a gratuitous permit. Also, if its species is under CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. So if it's an endangered species, you need to have a CITES permit. If you are bringing in specimens between areas in the Philippines, such as regions, it also requires you for transport. So marami permit talaga. It actually builds in a bit better. And if you're also loaning that specimen abroad, then you have to need a series of other permits for that. So yes, there's a lot of preparations in terms of putting it together. I'm not sure with um, anthropological specimens, unless there's a biological component within. So, for example, the hornbill headdress. So even though it is a anthropological item, an artifact, it does have a biological component, which is the hornbill skull.
Right. So I would like to ask again, in our participants for this museum training, there are also natural history. They focus also in the natural history. There's ethnographic museum. So what do you think about for startup museums? Would they rather start with the initial research first, or they would do collecting, or the other way around?
Our experience with natural history is your research actually helps build your collection. So we do go out on expeditions, do the inventories, and help collect the specimens in the field. And you then build up your collection, you build up your voucher specimens from that different areas. So yes, it is important that you do the research for you to build up your collection. Also, the same thing with some of the specimens that you can use in the exhibit. You can also prepare that as part of your exhibition, especially if you're doing dioramas. So there are two sets of specimens. For example, for birds, we can of course preserve them in fluid. You can preserve the skeleton, and you can preserve the skin. And there's two types of skins. One is the study skin, which is just the bird laid out on its back, just to preserve the key characters. So it doesn't look like a bird, it looks like a pillow. But then you have the display specimen, which of course is in a more elaborate way of taxidermy that you have to make and create. It's actually an art form, it's so difficult to create the bird as if it was still alive. You even have specialized glass eyes to help liven up the specimen. So yes, of course, if you need that particular diorama, then you have to go out on expedition to get the specialized taxidermy specimens.
Okay, thank you, JC. So there's a question from Noel Blanco. What are the challenges when you do research in science museums? No, so you covered a lot, no? So, and of course, obviously, you're very successful in implementing this. So what are the challenges when you do research in science museums, such as in your case?
So much to go into. Of course, the first one will be funding. Of course, a lot of the science-based studies are expensive, especially if you're aiming towards in more novel, innovative methods of analysis. So nowadays, we look into molecular phylogenetics in understanding systematics. So, dati talang specimen lang you measure it and you look at the key characters, although that's still acceptable. But a lot of people also want to include phylogeny, especially those which involve molecular phylogeny. So it is a bit, although molecular phylogeny in the past years is getting better, it's not as expensive as before. Of course, it's specialized skill. So yes, so you need to be able to absorb and adapt new methods. And of course, those new methods may be expensive. And it's how you innovate and find better ways. Also with the collections, keeping collections in the Philippines, our humid country, it's quite difficult to keep specimens dry. So my specialized system then for that. So it's also quite expensive to do the upkeep of, especially if each specimen has a certain set of requirements. For us, meron kaming jars of ethyl alcohol. So talagang it's a fire hazard. So we have to prepare for that and prepare the room as well.
Yeah. So I understand, of course, in ethnographic museums, we also need a lot of funding there to the upkeep of the collections and, of course, the operating expenses. No? So for the case of the Museum of Natural History, when it comes to funding, how, for instance, how for the startup museums, no, for other universities, how much would the requirements for funding for maintaining or starting up their own museums in in other universities, for instance?
Actually varies depending on the collection and the taxonomic group of that collection. Of course, the more upgrade and standard it is, meron naman tayong ISO standards. I don't think a lot of museums will be able to achieve that. Sometimes we refurbish a particular building to be a collections room. Hihira talaga yung nag-create ng building just for the museum. And then you have all the yung ang dapat nga yung may mga specimen collection rooms na halos hindi nakadikit sa wall yung floor. Para walang pest na makakatawid from the wall to the floor. It's like may mga ganong system. So talagang closed and pest-free. Pest-free, humidity-free. Medyo mahirap din ang humidity-free kasi pag naman ilaw, walang aircon, walang dehumidifier.
Yeah. So that's a special building, no, for the Museum of Natural History. So with your work in that field, do you have an idea on the state of natural history museums I'm sure you did benchmarking and visiting other natural history museums in other parts of the Philippines. Can you give us a picture of the situation now for this particular kind of museums?
I think as an overall, siguro in general set of collections, hindi mo talaga ma-achieve yung standard, international standard. Probably of course, the National Museum should, and they have the funding and they have the capability for that. And it's really great that we now have that system. So at least meron tayong sigurado isa. Even for us, siguro we adapt to certain systems na para ma-achieve mo yung tamang management. Of course, we do get funding. We are supported by the university. We also get funding from projects. You can apply for certain different grants. So that's a way for you to build up, especially for doing research. Kasi meron ka talagang maintenance at the museum, your staff and maintenance of the collection, yung overhead mo. But you also need additional funding to do the expeditions and help collect your specimens.
Okay, so thank you. There's a question from Bernardino. So she said, good morning, pre-COVID, and we often get student visitors here at the National Museum of the Philippines in Manila, asking where they can have plant, animal, and rock specimens identified. Can we direct them to UPLB-MNH for this? Are there any organizations that identifies and verifies different plant, animal, and rock specimens?
Yes, the MNH does provide, there's two types, medyo nakakalito yung mga pangalan. Merong scientific name verification. It's just verifying if the scientific name or the taxonomy being used is correct, especially if you put it on the title of your thesis. But there are also people who access, talagang they bring the specimen and the voucher to be ID'd. Sometimes a little weird kasi minsan dadala ng melon, alam mo namang melon na siya, but of course they need certification that it is a melon. So merong ganong system. Yes, so we do provide that particular service. Of course, it depends on the capability of our curators and staff. So hindi naman siguradong ma-ID. We can ID it at a certain level of the hierarchy. So pwedeng up to species level, pag hindi kaya, up to family order level.
Okay, so you have that kind of services at the
But not for geology. Wala po kaming. That's the only component we haven't developed well is geology.
Okay, thanks, JC. Now from Noel Blanco. So we discussed in the previous webinars about ethnographic museums. So this is the first time that we're having a natural history museum on board. Okay, so his question, what are the major differences of cultural and science museum in terms of research and publication?
Of course, there are two different sets of fields of philosophy. So, but we are now integrating. Meron na tayong integration. Classic example would be, for me, ethno-ornithology, because we help combine our understanding of anthropology and culture through the study of birds and how people relate to birds and how they use them. So yes, there are points where you can actually merge them together, and you can actually create an interesting part of your museum na kung halo-halo, hindi ka naman talaga natural history museum, hindi ka naman talaga graphic museum, you want to put a bit of both, then you have a certain area where you can actually merge them and explain things both on both fields.
Okay, thank you, JC. So there's a comment from Maria Cecilia Medina from UP Asian Center. So she said that she's very impressed with the museum and research. So more power, and she hopes that this kind of research in the Natural History Museum could be multiplied all over the country. So this is very important for, especially at this time of the climate change and rapid urbanization. So thank you, Maria Cecilia. Okay, so we have a question from Joseph Kuwa. No? For online campaigns, what is the most important aspect that we need to work on, considering the effect of COVID in museum goers? I think you covered that aspect, no? So what is the most important aspects that they need to work on, considering the effect of COVID in museum goers?
Of course, the most important effect would be you have no visitors because the exhibits are closed to visitors. But for researchers, there is a system where we can, of course, usually isa o dalawang tao lang naman yan, and we want to access a particular set of the collection. And of course, our collections are also quite separate from each other. They're actually on three different locations in the campus. So meron talagang social distancing allowed. But yung sa visitors, medyo mahirap-hirap. Especially if it's an enclosed space. Kasi most of our museums are air-conditioned, so di ganun kadali dapat nga mas ventilated. But yeah, so because you have no access to visitors, how do you then help educate your visitors who are not able to go to your museum? So one is using the online platform in putting out your services and exhibits or your research outputs, interest of what your museum has to offer. So yes, we can do virtual museums. Meron na ngayong app where you can actually create. Meron na siyang template. You just add the important photographs represented in your museum. You don't have to put all, but in teaser, or you have specific exhibits that you want to feature. So meron kaming exhibit na in-open September, which is the result of a collaboration with National Geographic photographer on photo arc. So when you visit the museum, you was able to take photos of fauna from Mount Makiling and around the campus. So yun yung exhibit namin yung photographs. Of course, we have the printed one in the museum, but because it's not accessible to the public, so we have one on virtual tour. So that's one way you can open your access to the public.
Okay, thank you, JC. I think the trend now is really to go online, no? So, in fact, the Museo Kordilyera is also started this online webinars. Then it's moving for the online virtual museum as well, no? So, but again, there's a lot of research that you need to include if you plan to have this on a platform, no? So, maraming ding mga kailangang na research that is necessary for setting this up. Okay, so John Emmanuel de Guzman is interested in the courses that you mentioned. Are there fees for these courses?
So both the cave ecology and the museum herbarium curatorship are open to undergrad and graduate students in the university. So UPLB students. I don't think we have one for open university. We do have, because this is a fixed course, part talaga siya ng curriculum. So kinukuha yan ng mga ecology students, systematic students, zoology, botany students. And so most specialized course as well. But we do have a summer course, which we shifted to July kasi nag-change na yung ating summer, which offers training on biodiversity assessment and museum techniques on how to preserve when you collect specimens. So yes, we do. It's been running for the past more than 10 years. Yun nga lang, this year we had to not offer it because of COVID-19.
Are there online courses for this, like short trainings on this one online?
Meron kaming versions na parang webinars. Of course, kasi talaga yung hands-on eh. Kasi when you collect, talaga punta ka ng mundok para mangolekta ng specimen. But now we do have some lectures available on our YouTube channel.
Okay. So maybe we can include that later on for the links, no, for this online trainings, no, on museum herbarium curatorships. So that's very interesting, no, for me and maybe for others who are starting up their Museum of Natural History. Okay, for this is from Anthony Barandino from Western Mindanao State University in Zamboanga City. Okay, he is. So we talked about preservation and all, no. So his question, how can we preserve different species using ethyl alcohol? How does it differ from using the traditional formalin, and which one is safer?
Before I answer that, I clarify ko lang, yung Museum Herbarium Curatorship course and the Cave Ecology course is offered by the Institute of Biological Sciences. So we collaborate with the Institute to help implement the course, but the actual teachers are from the IDS.
Okay.
So if you need to contact them, you have to go through IDS. Yes, so specimens nowadays, formaldehyde is a temporary fixative. It helps fix the specimen. Of course, you can still preserve specimens in formaldehyde for as long as they are buffered. And also you have to keep on topping it up, or you have to check the effectivity of your formaldehyde because it does dissipate. Kaya nga siya naaamoy yan, nagdi-dissipate din yung actual formaldehyde. Also, there's a challenge in doing the mixing up kasi usually buy it as 32%, tapos kailangan mo lang 10%. So you do the volume analysis computation. Yes, you can do it as a fixative. Fixative meaning titigas yung specimen. So once you put it in that particular medium, mapifix na yung position ng specimen. So if you want to have certain characters, for example, sa palaka dapat kita yung digital pads, naka-open up yung, nakabuka yung bibig ng konti. So once you fix it, hindi mo na siya masyado change. Ganun din naman with any other fixative. Ethyl alcohol is also a fixative, but it takes time for it to kind of make it rigid. Formaldehyde, of course, is a fume, and it's also sort of a carcinogen. So long-term exposure can be risky. So dapat then well-ventilated, well protected, and you have to use the proper. So naka-gloves, naka-lab coat ka to protect yourself. Especially kung malaking specimen, we don't have that mahal din kasi ang ethyl alcohol. So yes, you can also temporarily, hindi naman ginagamit natin pang imbalsama. So especially for large carcasses, so pwede mo pang gamitin ng formaldehyde. And you do the fix it first in formaldehyde before you keep it in ethyl alcohol. Ethyl alcohol is a more long-term in terms of storage. You also have to check the effectivity of alcohol. Titignan mo din kung nagtatap up, nag-evaporate din. Meron tayong mga specimens, hindi mo pinapansin, pagbalik mo, 5 taon na, nag-evaporate na siya. Either natuyo yung specimen, or the worst thing with formaldehyde, it turns to formic acid, natunaw yung specimen. So, hanap pa ng hanap, parang may uhog-uhog dun sa loob. Yun na pala yung specimen mo, especially for important specimens. So, talagang, you have to manage and monitor your collection. Hindi mo siya pwede basta lang isa-store. You have to recheck them regularly. Meron nga dapat linya yan dun sa glass jar para malaman mo kung nag-evaporate mo yung ethyl alcohol.
Yeah.
So, yes.
So JC, just a follow-up. How long does the artifacts or the specimens can be preserved using these chemicals? What is the span of preservation for this kind of chemicals? Does it vary also with the kind of specimens that you use or the kind of chemicals that are used?
Um, for formaldehyde, you have to have it buffered. So kailangan talaga hindi siya mag-age at magto-turn into formaldehyde. So check mo talaga yun. So merong sort of expiry siya.
Yeah.
So talagang i-prepare mo yun. Then you have to top it up eventually. You don't just add ethyl alcohol from a bottle into your... Kung ang volume mo, ang percentage na ginagamit mo ay 80 or 85%, sometimes 90%, then dapat yun pa rin yung ginagamit mo ng volume. Hindi pwedeng 80 yung ginamit mo standard, tapos bumili ka sa mercury, dalagyan mo ng 70% ethyl. So you have to keep up with the percentage of alcohol that you have on. Of course, hindi rin pwede dapat absolute. Kasi it also affects the specimen.
Okay, thank you, JC. From the Randy Nobleza question. So, hello, Dr. Gonzalez. Many thanks for an extensive presentation of the UPLB Museum of Natural History. So, his question, in Marinduque, apart from the National Museum branch, there are a couple of museums who keep natural specimens of beetles and butterfly. Does UP Los Baños, MNH, offer capacity building for such museums?
At the moment, wala po kaming program for that. We do have certain projects which involve stakeholders in terms of training, siguro in terms of the techniques used, but not specific for, say, beetles. Siguro pag may general kami entomological training, this is a short course in terms of collection and preservation. Kasi iba-iba din kasi yan. Sometimes it's specific to a particular taxon group. Hindi pareho ang preservation ng beetles at saka ng dragonfly. Iba din sa paru-paro. So hindi sila pareho. Hindi mo pwede i-itcha yung paru-paro sa bote, lagyan mo ng alcohol. Usually that's for dry, lagyan mo siya sa paper triangle, i-relax mo pa siya. So,
okay.
Very specific.
Thanks, JC. So here, related to the previous question about trainings, do you have any trainings coming up specifically on museum techniques for natural history museums?
Oh, yes, we do still have our summer course. It all depends on biosafety. We do have our own certified biosafety officer. So siya yung mag-develop ng guidelines whether it's safe for us to put in together a group of people in a very enclosed area. Kasi in training, although sometimes kung konti lang, I think it's depending on the social distancing, it may be possible. But again, yung numbers have to be limited, so we're not sure. But yeah, we do have our summer course. We'll just keep you posted on the website when it will be available. But if it's specific, you can ask directly the museum through email. We can direct you to a specialist, either the curator or staff who's working on that particular task. Katulad nun sa beetles. So dapat talaga beetles talaga ang kausap mo dyan for beetle specialist.
Okay, so there's a question in terms of organization for maybe the structural organization for the MNH setup, no? So does a researcher must be part of the board? Or maybe does a museum researcher should be part of a museum board? Tama ba tong question niya? So does a researcher, so you have a researcher in the museum, and does she have to be part of the board?
I think that is for
the board. Maybe you can share the composition of the MNH board, no, in your case, and if there are researchers that are included in the board, will that arrangement be fine or workable?
At the moment, we don't have a board. So we do have our organization structure. I mean, is apart from the director, you have the staff. You have the staff also are the coordinators. You have additional duties So yung 19 staff. We also have in project staff, depending on the project, so temporary staff. And then we have our seconded staff, which are, of course, the faculty with their specialization. Sila ang curators. So they are also appointed as curator. Especially kung meron silang particular group na meron dun sa collection that I can curate. So yeah, it's very specialized yung kanilang appointment. So you have a curator for herpetology, you have a curator for land snails, you have a curator for spiders, you have a curator for mites. So medyo madami sila. So I don't think we have a board, but we do have a set of curators and our staff.
Okay, so do you plan to set up a board later on?
Yes, there is that idea to kasi nga meron lang kailangan i-change yung mindset because we are under the university. The university provides all the maintenance and upkeeping, and of course the salary of the 19 staff. So at the moment, wala pa, but there are plans.
Okay, all right. Thank you, JC. So a lot of people are curious because you have a lot of specimens inside the museum, right? So can you share, there's another question here. Can you share your fire prevention system in your museum in case of fire? Because you have combustible chemicals, and electric wiring, I don't know. So what is your fire prevention system in your protection? This is also a means to protect the building, to protect the collections, important collections, no? So is there a kind of fire prevention system in your museum?
Yes, we do have a coordinator for not just fire, but also all the disaster issues. So meron kaming response officer for that within the staff. Siya nagko-coordinate within sa university, meron kaming parang fire marshal within the university. So yun, regularly nagpo-contact kami sa pinapa-check namin if we are at par in terms of safeguarding our collections. Of course, you have to check your fire. Hindi porque bumili ka ng fire extinguisher, okay na yun. You have to check the expiration din yan. You have to check whether it works. If the components are complete, so pinapa-check din yan, pinapa-certify. Also, how you safeguard the system. So naglipat na kami from unti-unti nung casing to metal rather than wood. All the jars have metal on lids na rin rather than plastic. So yun, maraming tinatanggal na combustibles within the system. Also, it's a specific room within the museum na sama-sama. Hindi na pwede halo-halo. Di porke nandun yung zoological collection, lahat ng specimens nandun. You have to separate na all the fluid. So it's kind of like a fluid room. Kasi nandun na lahat yung specimens with preserved in fluid, which is either formaldehyde or alcohol.
Okay, thanks, JC. There's a question from Kelly Ramos from Cagayan. Regarding museum collections as basis for student research, museum services in support of university research, and museums in support of academic programs for university museums. The question is, how do you start this one for museums without these mechanisms? So the question, I will rephrase. So you have this museum collections as a basis for student research. And you also mentioned the museum services, to support the university research activities and at the same time to support academic programs. I think the question of Kelly is, what about for university museums without mechanisms for these ones? So how do you start for this?
One is, of course, you need a person who specializes in idea identification of specimens. Kailangan talaga may specialist ka that is able to has the background in systematics to correctly identify a particular specimen, at least up to a certain level, whether species or up to family level. Mahirap din kasi na kung hindi sigurado, may procedure din kasi talaga siya for properly assigning the identification. Pwede humula. Kailangan talaga may process yan. And that's why you have that service. So of course you have to have the capability for it. You have the collection to help compare. And that is the purpose of what the collection is it's a voucher specimen that allows you to do a comparison. So have a specimen identified mo, then you have an unknown being brought into for identification. If that unknown, of course, is very similar to your voucher specimen, which is identified, then it helps you. Kaya nga siya voucher. Especially if it's a type specimen, then you compare it to the type to be able to safely say that it's the same species or the same taxon.
Yeah, maybe in addition to that, to start with a museum without this support or mechanisms, I think there are also community-led museums, no, that will come from the community, no. So there are also volunteers, or there may be families who own important artifacts that they could share. If they cannot donate it to the museum, you can actually do documentation, no, extensive documentation about a cultural practice or stories surrounding that particular object, no. So you start with that, no. So zero funding naman ito eh. So it's actually a personal effort, personal initiative to do documentation of what you can find in your community that are relevant, no, for the identity or the biography of that place, no. So I think you can start with that. And the other method is you can do cultural mapping, which will be in level 2 of this museum training, no. So identification of important activities, cultural practices, artisans, heritage sites, or even stories that you can actually document based on an artifact, no. So you're building that story all together until such time that you're ready to set up all of this in a place or in a museum setting, no. So that's how you begin, no. Start small, and then perhaps other people or other interested parties can actually support you with funding or other trainings, no, and all of that. Okay.
Actually, if it's a university museum, so it's a museum within your school, halos lahat din naman ng university museum with a natural history component, all of those are derived from teaching collection. So yun yung purpose initially. And of course, the collections have grown, and some of them are very important collections. And through time, it becomes part of a heritage collection. So yung use niya as a teaching tool becomes limited. So may limited access ka kasi hindi mo pwedeng basta-basta lang. Dapat may training din yung pag-handle ng specimen. But yes, you still have certain components within that your museum that allows you to be able to provide the tools to help in teaching. So I think...
I think some of our participants, the museums that are in our training, they started with teaching collections based on our surveys, no, the questionnaire that they answered. They started with the teaching collection muna, and then eventually it will grow on as you build the collection through time. Okay, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, JC. So there's a question from Maria Jose Halin Manalo. So ito, JC, may comment. So we visited UPLB Natural Museum years back. We found the collections very impressive. My young children were in awe. Our concern is that the location is too out of the way. Sasadyain daw talaga. Sana po mas accessible na ang area where it is located. So your comment.
Wala na po ako magagawa sa access kasi the building that was provided for us for the exhibits are in the center, which is the quadrangle of the upper campus of UPLB, which is called the College of Forestry and Natural Resources quadrangle. So doon kami lang po yung building na nasa gitna ng quadrangle, and which is surrounded by all the other buildings of the college. So yes, although yun po yung main building, the hortorium is actually by the admin building, and the collections are mostly in the biological science building, BioSci, where IBS is. We have 4 of the collections there, and then we have 1 at the Forestry Biological Sciences building, yung Forestry Herbarium. So talaga hiwa-hiwalay din naman po siya, which is not normally open to public visitors. It's actually accessed by researchers and students who want to look at the actual collection. Iba po yung exhibits talaga on display. So yun po yung nasa main building. Wala na po kami magagawa i-change unless mabibigyan po kami ng separate building. We've been there since 1995. So yes, we have plans to renovate it. Medyo naipit lang sa COVID. And we also have plans to annex it with additional space. Kasi of course, with the growing collection, hindi na kasha. We're running out of space. So we need better space to provide and help safeguard our collections.
I'm just curious, JC, do you have an off-site storage room? Because I know museums such as yours are, the collections are really growing. So do you have an off-site storage rooms as well?
When di namin kailangan ng off-site kasi the actual collections
are all there.
Well, not on the main building. They're on the still on the separate teaching buildings. So sa IBS, andun yung Chanko Hall, andun ang entomological, zoology and wildlife, mycological, at saka botanical herbarium.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, JC. So there's a question from Grace Bunda from ISCOF. I don't know what the acronym for ISCOF is. So is it possible for us to have a virtual benchmarking in your museum? At the same time, can we invite you to conduct a virtual GBIF training for us? Do you know ISCOF? Yes, I don't know.
Sounds a bit there. Kasi kami umattend lang din kami ng GBIF training. Was, of course, it was implemented joined together by UST and National Museum.
Mm-hmm.
Through the Herp Watch Philippines. So sila yung main proponent. So in a way, we just picked up on that, and then of course we helped develop additional. Yung natutunan namin, pinapasa namin, ini-echo namin dun sa staff namin and our curators. But if you need a more comprehensive, I think you need to get a person that actually teaches that. One way is you can contact the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Sila yung nagtuturo actually ng GBIF, and they have the staff that is, sila din yung nagtuturo sa amin. Especially when we have seminars for GBIF, sila yung invite namin to do the lectures. So yes, you contact the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity.
Okay, thank you, JC. So again, the recurring question on funding, okay? From Florita Garcia, how much is the initial budget to start a research for museums? Budget for research.
It varies depending on how comprehensive your expedition is. Nowadays, of course, magdadagdag ka na budget na hindi mo dinalagay dati. You have to extend your field days because if you're traveling to another island or to another province, that may requirements in a 14-day quarantine, then you have to extend your stay to the additional number of days of quarantine. Siyempre may pandayam yun, may dapat magsistay ka somewhere. You also have to pay for additional charges for testing. So marami ka nang nadagdag beyond dun sa. So funding-wise, it varies depending on your program. Kung ano gusto mong pag-aralan. It's even as cheap as a few thousand pesos kung wala ka namang gagamiting, hindi ka mag-employ ng tao, wala kang bibiling gamit. Wala. So it depends on the study as well. And also if you need materials to start off for preservation. And then you have more expensive ones, the more high-tech. If you do a study that involves molecular techniques, GIS, or other additional engineering components na very novel, laking gamit. Even with digitization, you need a better camera, high res. Kailangan mo ba ng electron microscope to see the features of a particular, say, langgam, pinag-aaralan mo, kailangan mo talaga makita yung hairs and yung features ng yung sete. So, yun, depende talaga po kung ano yung gagawin.
Yeah.
But of course,
So,
there's general inventory that involves less high-tech na gamit.
yeah. So for Museo Kordilyera, no, or any other faculty researches, depende actually sa scope ng research nyo. And of course, you have to return to the kind of questions that you would like to ask. So if it's a research that are done in the library, something a low budget yon. And then if there are researches that are done that requires field work for X number of months, from 6 months to a year, of course, you have higher budget. How many people are you going to involved in the project, whether that's within your department, syempre low budget. And then of course, if it's interdisciplinary research, no, and then it involves other universities, then it would cost a lot as well, no. So depende talaga doon sa nature ng questions that you're asking, no, and the scope of your research. Okay, this another interesting question, JC. We talk about space in museums, no, and that's also a major concern, no, for ethnographic museums. So the question is, due to limited space, some museums tend to put in one building both the collections of the natural science specimens with the non-natural science artifacts, no? Maybe referring to ethnographic artifacts. Is it safe to combine these two types of collections altogether?
If this requirement for storage is the same. So for example, kung study skins require dry, non-humid conditions na walang point of pest entry, pumasok lang dyan isang dermestid o isang cloth moth, then pwedeng, or silverfish, pwedeng kainin yung specimens mo. So unless you do pest management. Again, with artifacts, you might bring in pests. You have to de-pest any material. So artifacts may tend to have a lot of, depende siguro dun sa artifact, baka may makatataguan dun yung pests. So yun yung medyo hindi pinagsasama. Of course, curation is the most important part there. Halo-halo, medyo hirap mag-curate. Kailangan kang merong konting classification system kung ano yung. To a point nga, even our National History Collection, hiwa-hiwalay siya by the taxon group. So the entomological collections are together kasi very similar yung management system nila. But there are certain arthropods sometimes included in the entomological that might have different curatorial and management options. So kailangan mo din siya separate. Like sa amin yung mites, karamihan naman nun ay maliit, nasa slide box. So hindi siya ganun kaano na space. So pwede na siyang, hindi naman separate, but we have a separate system for it.
Yeah. So the key there, even if you have different specimens or ethnographic artifacts, is really the curation, no? The deep knowledge in creating all of these artifacts. And of course, there's a clear delineation in terms of the division and then the arrangement, and then of course, the conservation needs, no, for the museum. Okay, so here's another interesting question. Did you ever conduct research in places or gathered specimens with superstitious beliefs or considered as sacred by the locals? How did you deal with this? No, and of course, when you acquire this, how do you take care of them inside the museums?
Yes, there are some for biological specimens. Siguro mas nakaano siya sa artifacts, pero there are some ano na ay huwag mo kolektahin yan kasi they're either may superstitious ano nga sila inclination. That's the reason why we have permits. So with permits, you have prior informed consent. You have to get permission from the local government as well as all the other stakeholders that might be involved, especially indigenous people. So kung may say sila, kailangan magpaalam ka din muna. Kasama yan dun sa requirements before you can apply for the gratuitous permit. So kasama dyan, kung protected area siya, kailangan din ng PAMBI resolution. So kung may handling ka na specimen, kailangan ng animal welfare permit. Kasi you have, especially kung na-sacrifice a specimen, so kailangan may proper method doon. Hindi ko pwede parang hampasin. Kailangan may proper methodology to ease the animal to become a specimen. So yes, you need permission to get the permit and for you to collect. So I think it's sort of straightforward na hindi ka basta-basta pedang hindi ka nagpaalam. So if there are superstitious belief, I think that would help prevent you from collecting a specimen or even entering a particular area where the specimen is kasi kailangan mo ng paalam. Nowadays, it's you have to go through the protocol, especially now with the pandemic. You have to go through another set of protocols for biosafety. Nowadays, we are now looking into how are we exposed because we work with biological specimens, including bats, and we study bat coronavirus. Well, our curators and staff study bat coronaviruses. So your exposure is there. So you now have to develop another set of guidelines and means to protect yourself. So superstitious belief medyo hindi pa namin problema.
JC, there's a traction in that particular question, no, about locals taking care of specimens. So may follow-up siya doon. No? So what do you think about locals taking care of specimens, no, in their custody? May mga ganyang bang cases?
I'm not really sure. Siguro with some, unless they put a certain ownership, for example, like a skull. So skull ng whale, for example. So they put an ownership on that. Maybe two-way kasi alam mo may bibili o may it's worth something, or they have a particular affinity for it, whether religious or otherwise. So yes, they can. I think it's their right. And especially if they did the means of getting the specimen through permit, why not? But there are guidelines that you need to follow, which are under the law, especially if paano ba explain? If hindi naman siya bumabangga sa RA 9147 and also sa heritage law. So there's two laws I think that you need to consider whether you keep a specimen or not. For your own use.
Okay. So JC, there's another question. How many from Kathleen Shelo? How many individuals would you recommend for a museum collection for a single species?
You have your type, of course. If it's the original species, you have the type, but it also has a set of type series comparable to the type. Then you have, say, importante kasi you look into male, female, adult, and juvenile, other stages of its life cycle to be able to understand its whole natural history, want to understand the entire story of what it is about a particular species. So yeah, may represent. Even kami sa birds, we collect eggs or nest kasi you want to understand ang itsura ng egg at nest ng particular ibon na yan. And then you have vouchers for calls. So you record the calls and you have call vouchers. For bats, meron kong recorded calls. So let's depend. So as many as allowed. So because nowadays, we do have laws on that. One is, of course, dun sa permit mo, they will indicate the number of specimens that you can take. May limitation yun. Depende dun sa status ng species na kukolektahin nyo. So if it's rare or possibly endangered, it's either you're not allowed to collect or for scientific purposes, may limitation yun at kung ano yung kukolektahin nyo doon. Of course, pag threatened, I don't think you are allowed to collect. Pero of course, meron namang representation ng pwedeng feather, pwedeng hindi the entire specimen. Siguro, can take blood.
Okay, thank you, JC. No? So, from Alicia Esguera, may tanong siya. How do you manage the accountability of artifacts? No? So, we know, she said that we know that in government institutions, even staplers are in the accountability of personnel who was issued that material. How about the collection in the UPLB museum? What is the university policy regarding property accountability in terms of the museum artifacts?
Hindi naman naka-MR sa amin ng specimens. Yes, there are office equipment and office supplies, which can be MR'd to you, to a particular staff. The specimens are responsibility of the entire museum, so hindi po siya naka-MR. Of course, we all have the responsibility to make sure that the upkeep and the preservation and the storage is up par in that standard as much as possible as we can. So, wala lang po kami MR na specimen.
Okay. Thanks, JC. There's a question from Jimbo Fatala. In applying interdisciplinary methods in natural history museum researches, particularly on organisms found within indigenous peoples' environment or domains, do the UPLB Museum also have study programs to integrate indigenous knowledge in the identification of names and taxa of certain species? I am referring to taxonomy, no? Folk taxonomy in the words of the linguist anthropologist David Harrison.
Yes, we are very much interested in ethnobiology, both ethnobotany and ethnozoology. In my case, ethnoornithology. There is a kind of dwindling number of people who still remember the local names and the dialect names of certain bird animals within their area. And of course, they vary depending on the dialect. Sayang hindi kasi siya na-document eh. And some of them are not passed on to their descendants. So pag namatay na yung may alam, wala na. And sometimes nababago siya depending din sa how nakakahalubilo ng community. If the community is no longer using that particular name, so syempre ibang name na yung magagamit, either Visayan or Tagalog, or so nababago na nawawala na yung original name. For example, like sa akin, Calao. Calao is a very usual name for the hornbill. But Calao is Spanish. Actually still spelled French, C-A-L-A-O, spelling rather than the usual Calao. But so it's an acquired name for a hornbill. So yung original name niya medyo nawala. But some of the indigenous people do have certain names for them. Pero nga karamihan din dun sa ibang groups, Calao na yung ginagamit nila. So nawawala na rin yung original. I think for the Agda, it was Kaau. Very similar pa rin. So someone has to document it.
Yeah. Thanks, JC. This is related question from Nina Cristina Zamora, no, about naming and the use of language in science museums. So the question is, does translation in Filipino or local languages advisable for a science museum?
Again, sorry?
Does translation in Filipino or local languages advisable for a science museum?
Depending on how you're going to use it in terms of, kasi mga certain, we've been through that a lot in terms of, even with the teaching issue, ang daming sciences na hindi naman necessarily merong equivalent in Tagalog or in Filipino. So you have to Filipinize a certain word, or just accept it as it is. And especially for scientific names, di ba talaga pwede gamitin ito? And then yung agreement for local names, because there's so many dialects, wala talagang agreement in terms of local names, especially for a species that's widespread. Siguro uwak, madali-dali kasi uwak in Tagalog is uwak in Visayan. So madaling mag-translate to Filipino. Wala lang kasing gumagawa ng standardized Filipino names for biological specimens. There was one attempt. There was a lexicon of trees that was published in UPLB. So yun na yun, at least yun nagagamit in terms of local names for trees, but not for all animals. Kaya nga sa atin, ang daming tutube, tutube. Actually, sometimes if you look at it in English, one is called a racer, one is called a driver, one is called a... Kasi ang dami niyang interesting names. Pero sa atin, ano man ang kulay, ano man species, tutube. Ang pinakaiba na lang is kung malaki siya, tutubing kalabaw. So yes, we need to standardize and of course document as much as we can in terms of local language. So yes, you can use Filipino. I think that's interesting. If you have your English and your Filipino version, I don't think it's wrong. It's good actually that you promote that particular translation in your museum.
Yeah, I think for using multi languages inside the museums, you have to understand what is the purpose, no, for doing the translation, or if you're using English or local language to and Filipino. So ano ba yung purpose? And then you have to identify what is the dominant language in your community, no? Or although that's more empowering to use the local languages, but you have to use it effectively in terms of the captioning that you will put in the exhibition. Okay, so there's another question here. Uh, from anonymous attendee. Question: we would like to set up a diorama in the museum, but we currently do not have actual specimens yet. Will it be all right to do a replica model first and replace it with actual specimens when it becomes available?
As long as the replica looks very similar to the actual species, why not? Actually, now we're using a lot of replicas in our dioramas kasi nga, there are some specimens or at least species na hindi mo talaga pwede isama sa diorama because they don't preserve well dried on dry form. So meron talagang mga replicas. They either build them from plasticine or plaster, or so of course magaling talaga yung, it's an artist that does that para magmukha siyang buhay o magmukha siyang totoo. There are some people who can carve something in paper and wood and still looks very realistic. So depende talaga dun sa how you present your replica. So baka ngayon na ngayon gamitin nyo kasi baka the specimen might be more well off as a specimen in storage kasi pinoprotektahan mo siya. So nowadays, because sa diorama, unless pest-proof yung diorama, baka pasukin siya ng dermestid. You actually see a lot of dioramas with stuffs, taxidermy, animals na medyo nakakain na yung mga sira-sirang parts na or nagdi-decay na yun. Kasi nakain na siya ng pest, ng insect pest, especially dermestids.
Okay, thank you, JC. A question from Rona Repancol. Given the many possibilities, how much specimens will you suggest to be displayed if a museum has a local museum, such as municipal or provincial museums, that will display other different materials? Which specimen should the museum focus on?
I think it's best to focus on your region, or especially if sa atin maraming regional and island endemics. So dun lang nakikita. So it's best to feature something which is unique to your area, highlight that for people to understand, and of course build awareness on a particular species. But of course anything that of course helps teach people to appreciate natural history and biology and is important also. So wala naman sigurong restrictions, but if you want to prioritize, then prioritize something that reflects the area around you. So kung malapit kayo sa dagat, then you have marine specimens are more accessible. You can highlight that. Sometimes yung may mga specimens hindi natin pinapansin might be some of the more important ones, like snails, for example. Pati nga kuto might be interesting as long as you properly put it in display that makes it interesting and accessible. Ika nga nasa imagination din yan ng exhibitioner kung paano mo yung i-develop yung exhibit.
Yeah. I think in addition to answer that question, if we go back to Professor Roland Tolentino's talk last time, it largely depends on the kind of story that you want to tell, no? The omnibus of the story, no? So ano ba yung gusto mong ikwento? And that will actually dictate the kind of specimens that you will need for your exhibition, no? So it's good to, I second JC's suggestion on focusing on the local community, what's special, what's unique in the locality. But again, what kind of story do you want to tell? No? So we go back to the omnibus and of course the kind of curation that you are requiring for that specific exhibition. Okay, ang dami pang tanong, JC. Okay lang sa'yo. So here, again, question for HEIs. Where can one look for funds or grants on research and publication? No?
Um, there's a lot of possibilities if you just search for it. For grants, there's international grants are available, not just for may mga general funds for museums. Kasi yan specific yan dun sa area ng museum. Actually, if you Google that, I've done that before. We provide grants for the museums within Scotland. So yun lang nasa Scotland. So hindi ka makaka-access ng kalabas. But of course, here we have the NCCA, National Commission for NCCA. So you can access the commission for anything that involves artifacts. And of course, kasama din dyan ang natural history specimens. Of course, the heritage law covers up to natural history. There are grants within the government, such as those available from CHED. If you're
NCCA, could be TAP.
DOST.
DOST.
There are specific grants sometimes that are associated with a particular, say, MEDA, Picard, so may specific. So, depende sa institution. Just have to check kung ano yung coverage. You can also access international grants. Why not? There are certain, JICA, I think, helps facilitate that. May mga small grants din available for within museums abroad. May mga museum organizations like ICOM, and they can help access and facilitate that. And kung may alam silang available grant, they can facilitate that. There are zoos and aquariums as well, associations, which provide grants for research. Kasi sa kanila, meron na sila nung particular specimen in exhibit, but they want to help understand it in the wild and help protect it in the wild, help conserve it in the wild. So they bring out grants for that particular purpose for research. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, JC. Question, no? Is publication a necessity every museum should aim for?
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely. Kasi mahirap naman, actually you can't describe a new species without publishing your description. Hindi pwede kayo na nakakaalam. Kailangan pa alam sa lahat at kailangan para ano din siya sa for review kasi meron tayong international standards for taxonomy. May guidelines na din. So pag mali yung pagkaka-follow mo ng description, so that can be refuted. So kailangan talaga siyang publish. And of course, the publication should be as wide ang distribution as possible. But there are available, especially na may online na, so it's more accessible. I'm not saying it's cheaper, but some of them, of course, so mas malaking access na gusto mo, mas maganda yung impact factor mo. Siyempre, may funding ka, then you can go for the high-end journals. There are journals which are more specific to a particular group, especially for natural history.
Yeah, for the case of Museo Kordilyera, so every exhibitions that we had, we always come up with a publication or monographs, no? So for the tattoo exhibition and photograph and about the missionary anthropologists, we came up with 3 separate monographs. And then in the second exhibition, the Feast of Merit, we had the book catalog publication. And then we are coming up with a book catalog also for the current exhibition on textiles. No, so the publication is very important to disseminate to your public and the communities that you serve. So it is a way of returning the information, returning the courtesy of to the source communities where you gather the information, and at the same time to keep a record and a documentation of that particular culture, no? And the practical side of having the publications, once the exhibition is already down, or it is pulled down, you can always refer to these publications, no? How it looked like, what are the annotations, what are the information, and all of that, no? So I concur again with JC that research and publication are very important component, no, for the museums. You also have if museums doesn't have funds for a, a publication like books and monographs, you can also come up with flyers that you can actually distribute, no, to your visitors in one-page flyer about the exhibition. That's a very modest way of disseminating your research. And some of this can be also used by teachers, no, kung ano yung nakalagay na information about the exhibition. They can use that in schools, no. Sometimes when you go to museums, there are flyers, there are brochures that you can use, no, from these small printouts or publications. Okay, so 11:50 na, JC. Okay, since we're talking about publication and research, no, there's a question here that some research, some academic research, no, are not accessible to the public either due to the difficulty in access or the complexity in the jargons used. Do you think that the museum should become a conduit between research community and the public? And how do we establish and maintain this connection?
Actually, for publications, not necessarily the museum's job in terms of publication to make it a conduit. That's a library. Of course, museums also have their libraries specialized for that particular specimens or taxonomic groups. And so kami may library din sa museum. We, of course, have specialized journals. But nowadays, mas marami namang access online. There are e-copies that are available the open access, of course not all. There are authors which make it available on a limited use through another program such as I think ResearchGate or Academia or ano. I don't know how it works that since sila na may author, so pwede kang, so it's just a matter of contacting the author and asking them for if they can get a copy, not through the journal system, especially if the journal is required, kailangan mo na subscription. But of course, I think a lot of schools now have subscriptions in general. So just check your library access, especially if you are with a university. You can also request your university or your librarian to include that in your access. Especially now na meron tayong Athens. So you can link up to that, and that then links up with all other journal systems na pwedeng maging accessible. I think dapat di tayo matatakot na maging accessible sa atin yung dati hindi natin na-access. Just have to find a way to help develop it. But there are other venues for you to make it accessible. Not as print form, but also as a digital copy.
Okay, so I think we are down to our last question for budding scientists, no? How does one explain to small curious children the need to kill, in quotation, or collect dead animals for research purposes?
Yes, that is for a lot of kids, it's not easily difficult to do that to ayaw sabihin lower organism, but an organism na hindi natin kino-consider mas for example, between an insect and a bird, mas may affinity ka dun sa bird because it's a vertebrate. So, mas madaling pumatay ng ipis kesa pumatay ng maya. But there are people who have, of course. For us in biology, we've come accustomed to, as long as you have a specific, you follow a specific set of protocols na may humane treatment dun sa animal. Especially when you're going to sacrifice it for a collection. Katulad nung sa palaka, I still remember the dark ages, sabi nga nila na mangungulekta ka ng palaka, ilalagay mo sa bote, ilalagay mo ng formaldehyde. Kung ano itsura niya nung namatay, habang nalulunod sa formaldehyde, yung itsura niya sa bote. Kaya may makikita ka lumang boteng specimen ng palaka. Nga nga nakaganyan-ganyan pa yung mga palaka. Kaya nga, kung ano yung itsura nila na namatay, yung itsura nila. Now you have to properly anesthetize them, either through may pinapahid na drops, to anesthetize them, or you can pith. So may method talaga. May iba electric system, or you put in a certain chemical to humanely treat it. And then you have to fix the specimen properly So you have to take care and make the specimen look good kasi nag-sacrifice yung hayop na yun for that particular purpose, whether educational or museum use. And of course, you have to, and that's why taking care of specimens is important kasi those animals or plants, plant parts, sacrifice themselves for that particular purpose. And it's our responsibility to protect.
Okay. So, JC, there's a last question that we need to accommodate before we end, no, from Alicia Esguerra. So this is a follow-up question from the earlier questions that was asked. So, so she's wondering, kasi yung government sector, the artifacts are issued a memorandum of receipt, no, as a part of the accountability. So, can you comment on this? What is the practice, no, in terms of accountability of artifacts, no, that are issued with memorandum of receipts?
Memorandum of receipts.
Maybe I can answer this. So in the museum, we have a record of the documents or the papers or even the receipts, no, that we buy, no, or acquire for the museum. No? So it is properly accounted for, for documentation and recording purposes. No? Importante talaga yon kasi once there's a process of deaccession or in the process of deaccession, you have these records, no? Kung kailan mo i-deaccession, if they are no longer useful, and if you are keeping it, no, what are the records? And from these collections, you actually build again the biography of that artifact. So that is very important. Okay, so no more questions. I think we already exhausted all the questions. Okay. All right. So thank you to our participants who asked the questions. No. So do you have last words, JC, for our participants all over the Philippines? We are live on Zoom, on YouTube, and the VLE, virtual learning platform of the University of the Philippines in Baguio. So do you have last words?
For research, it is important for us to conduct our research. As long as you follow the proper protocols and guidelines, especially with safety, animal welfare, any law that attaches to it, whether heritage law or wildlife act, kailangan natin sundin yung protocols kasi you're creating an assemblage of data from your research and you want to publish it, and you have to publish it through the proper channels. And kailangan clear lahat yung sistema na ginamit mo. And also with for us to go and access peer review, don't be shy to ask for help. And if it's not a peer review, you can have another person review your work before you publish it. It's just to kind of improve the standard of what we're putting out as a publication. Don't be afraid to access new novel skills. Hindi totoo yung old dogs can't do new tricks. Everyone can still learn something. And it's amazing that don't be afraid also to collaborate and integrate with other people when you have another set of skills that may help improve what you're doing. So research is basically not just yourself, but it's a collaboration, and it's also an engagement with different people. It's good also to have good contacts for people around, not just the Philippines, but around the world.
Okay. Thank you so much again, JC, for the very engaging talk and, of course, for the accommodating a lot of questions for our webinar today. So we'll see you again and hope to see you at the Museo Kordilyera when things are better in the coming months. No? So thank you so much to our participants. I hope you are well despite the wrath of Typhoon Ulysses. No? So I hope you are keeping well. So tomorrow, I'm going to talk about the process of curatorial practice, conceptualizing and curating museum exhibitions using the Museo Kordilyera case. No, so our certificates, please sign our feedback form. So it is electronically generated. If you sign in the feedback form, then you get an automatic reply to get your certificates. We cannot issue certificates if you logged in on the next day. Now, you should log in on the same day. Okay, thank you very much. It's already 12 and have a good day. Thanks, JC, and bye-bye. Thank you.